Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. My eyes snapped open and for a moment I was utterly disoriented. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, illuminating a room that was familiar yet wrong. The scent of lies, overly sweet and cloying, filled the air. My hand instinctively went to my left ring finger, expecting to feel the weight of the enormous diamond Ethan had given me. It wasn't there. Then it hit me, the room, the flowers, the date. I was in my old bedroom at Hale Manor, the family estate, and if my suddenly racing heart was correct, today was. I scrambled out of bed, my silk pajamas twisting around my legs, and rushed to the antique vanity. The reflection staring back at me was younger, softer, the lines of worry and heartbreak not yet etched around my eyes. This was me 5 years ago, the day before my engagement party to Ethan Sterling. Oh hell no, I whispered, my voice trembling. This time it wasn't a dream. It was a reliving, a horrifying, stomach-churning déjà vu of the worst kind. I remembered it all. The engagement, the marriage, the slow, agonizing unraveling of my life. Ethan, the charming, charismatic sociopath who'd systematically dismantled my happiness piece by piece. Margot, my half-sister, the viper in designer clothing who'd orchestrated my downfall with a smile. I remembered the years of neglect, the public humiliations, the whispered rumors. I remembered the crushing loneliness, the feeling of being utterly trapped in a gilded cage. I remembered my father's sudden death, the accusations of embezzlement, the way my family, my own blood, had turned against me. I remembered dying alone, my reputation in tatters. I'd rather marry a rabid badger than that two-faced backstabber. I trailed off, unable to even utter his name without a wave of nausea. This wasn't a second chance at happiness. It was a second chance at survival. A chance to rewrite my history, to outwit my enemies, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. The Hale family fortune, my rightful inheritance, had been snatched away by their combined greed and manipulation. It had been a slow, agonizing bleed, orchestrated with a cruelty I still struggled to comprehend. My hands clenched into fists. This time things would be different. This time I would be the one pulling the strings. The engagement party was a blur of forced smiles, champagne flutes, and air kisses. Hale Manor, a monument to old money and even older grudges, was decked out in all its ostentatious glory. The air was thick with the scent of roses and the unspoken tension that always simmered beneath the surface of our family gatherings. I played the part of the blushing bride-to-be, gliding through the crowd, accepting congratulations and pretending to be blissfully ignorant of the vipers circling around me. But inside I was a whirlwind of calculations and simmering rage. There was Ethan, all charm and practiced sincerity, his hand possessively on my waist. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cold ambition in his eyes, the subtle smirk that played on his lips when he thought no one was watching. In my past life, I'd been blinded by his charm, by the promise of love and security. This time I saw him for what he was, a predator. And then there was Margot, my half-sister, with her angelic face and her serpent tongue. She was the picture of elegant envy, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She clung to Ethan's arm, a subtle reminder of their secret alliance, their shared contempt for me. In my past life I'd foolishly trusted her, confided in her, considered her a friend. This time I knew her for what she was, my enemy. As the evening wore on, I observed them dissecting their interactions, noticing the subtle cues I'd missed before. The co-glances, the whispered conversations, the way they manipulated everyone around them, including my own father. It was a masterclass in deception, and I was the unwilling student forced to relive the lesson. Finally, as the band played a particularly saccharine waltz, I knew it was time. I took a deep breath, raised my glass and called for attention. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice clear and steady despite the tremor in my hands. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me. Ethan squeezed my hand, a warning disguised as affection. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I continued, meeting his gaze with a cold smile, "and I've realized that I can't possibly marry Ethan." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Margot's carefully constructed mask of composure slipped, revealing a flicker of pure rage. Ethan's grip tightened on my hand, his knuckles turning white. "What are you saying, Vivian?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "I'm saying," I replied, pulling my hand away, "that this engagement is over. I'm calling it off. I turned to the stunned crowd, my voice ringing with newfound conviction. I deserve better, and frankly, I added with a pointed look at Margot, so does this family. I walked away, leaving them to their shock and outrage. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of a champagne glass shattering on the marble floor. Watching their jaws drop was almost worth living through that first life, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. Almost. My plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It was a high-stakes gamble with potentially catastrophic consequences, but I was out of options. And frankly, after reliving my own demise, I was feeling a little reckless. My target, Alexander Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, the largest and most formidable competitor to Hale Enterprises. A man known for his ruthless business acumen, his icy demeanor, and his complete lack of social graces. He was Ethan's biggest rival, the one man my former fiancé truly feared. In my past life, Alexander Whitmore had been a peripheral figure, a shadowy presence on the edges of my social circle. We'd barely spoken, just a few polite exchanges at industry events. But I remembered one instance. A brief moment of unexpected kindness, a whispered warning about Ethan that I'd foolishly dismissed. He'd been my only secret ally, a silent observer who'd seen through the charade. This is the most brilliant or the most insane thing I've ever done, I muttered, pacing my room. Probably both. I spent the next few days researching him, devouring every article, every interview, every financial report I could find. I needed to understand him, to anticipate his reactions, to craft a proposal he couldn't refuse. I learned about his business empire, his philanthropic endeavors, surprisingly extensive given his reputation and his complete lack of a personal life. He was a recluse, a workaholic, a man consumed by his ambition. I knew my approach had to be direct, bold, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. He wouldn't be swayed by charm or flattery. He'd respond to logic, to power, to a mutually beneficial proposition. I crafted a proposal outlining the terms of a strategic alliance, a marriage of convenience that would consolidate our power, protect my assets, and ultimately crush Ethan and Margot. It was a cold, calculated document devoid of any pretense of romance. It was a business deal, pure and simple. With the proposal clutched in my trembling hand, I requested a meeting. To my surprise, he agreed. The game was on. Whitmore Tower was a monument to power. All steel and glass, it soared into the sky, a physical manifestation of Alexander Whitmore's ambition. Walking into the lobby felt like entering another world. A world of hush, efficiency, and barely contained ruthlessness. I was ushered into a waiting room that was more luxurious than most people's homes. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. I smoothed down my dress, a simple but elegant sheath that I hoped projected an image of confidence. I definitely didn't feel it. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now," a crisp, efficient assistant said, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and followed her. Alexander Whitmore's office was vast, minimalist, and dominated by a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the city. He was standing with his back to the door, staring out at the view, his hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn when I entered. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He finally turned and I felt a jolt of something, intimidation mostly. He was even more imposing in person, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that could have been carved from granite. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, cold and piercing. He looked like he could freeze hell over with a single glare. I thought, my carefully rehearsed opening lines evaporating from my mind. "Okay, Vivian, don't screw this up," I reminded myself. "Miss Hill," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "You requested this meeting. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to propose a marriage of convenience to one of the most powerful men in the city. No pressure." I took another deep breath and launched into my pitch. I laid out my proposal clearly and concisely, explaining the benefits of a strategic alliance, the way we could combine our resources, our influence, our power. I emphasized the mutual benefit, the financial advantages, the strategic positioning. I didn't mention Ethan or Margot by name, but the implication was clear. This was about more than just business. It was about revenge. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was intrigued, amused, or simply waiting for me to finish so he could have me escorted out. When I was done, he finally spoke. Marriage, he said, his voice devoid of any inflection. A rather archaic solution, wouldn't you agree? Perhaps, I replied, meeting his gaze, but also an effective one. A merger in the most literal sense. He studied me for a long moment, his blue eyes seeming to penetrate my very soul. I forced myself to remain calm, to project an image of unwavering confidence. Inside, I was a churning mess of nerves and adrenaline. You broke off your engagement to Sterling, he said finally. Why? It wasn't an accusation, just a question, but I knew he was testing me, probing for weakness. Because I realized it was a mistake, I said truthfully. A mistake I intend to rectify. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. And you believe marrying me is the solution? I believe it's the best solution, I replied. For both of us. He was silent again, his gaze intense. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. I resisted the urge to fidget, to babble, to do anything that might betray my inner turmoil. Finally he spoke. Intriguing, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. But I have conditions. His conditions were as expected. Stringent. A detailed prenuptial agreement outlining the financial terms of our merger. A strict timeline. 1 year with an option to renew or dissolve depending on the success of the arrangement. And most importantly, a clause stipulating absolutely no emotional entanglement. This is a business arrangement, Miss Hale, he said, his voice cold and devoid of any warmth. Nothing more. I have no interest in a romantic entanglement, and I expect you to feel the same. No emotional entanglement, I thought, a flicker of something that felt suspiciously like disappointment crossing my mind. Challenge accepted, I said aloud. Of course, I have my own reasons, and none are emotional. He handed me the contract, a thick document filled with legal jargon and complex clauses. I skimmed it, my mind racing. It was a ruthless agreement designed to protect his interests above all else, but it also offered me the protection, the power, the opportunity one needed. I agree, I said, meeting his gaze. On one condition. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. And what is that? I want a seat on the board of Whitmore Industries, I said, my voice firm. I'm not just a figurehead, Mr. Whitmore. I intend to be an active participant in this alliance. He studied me for a moment, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Very well, Miss Hale, he said finally. You have a deal. We shook hands, sealing the agreement. His hand was large and firm, his grip surprisingly warm. A shiver ran down my spine, a strange mix of fear and excitement. I had just made a deal with the devil, and he was surprisingly handsome. The announcement of our impending marriage sent shockwaves through the city's elite. It was splashed across every newspaper, every gossip blog, every social media feed. Whitmore weds. Hale AIS in surprise move. Billionaire bachelor snapped up revenge marriage. The reactions were varied, but one thing was certain. No one saw it coming, especially not Ethan and Margot. And that, I thought with grim satisfaction, was just the beginning. The wedding was a whirlwind. A shotgun wedding, as the tabloids gleefully put it. Though in our case, it was more of a strategic strike than a hasty cover-up. Alexander, true to form, wanted it done quickly, efficiently, and with minimal fuss. I, on the other hand, wanted to make a statement. We compromised. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the private chapel at Whitmore Manor, a sprawling estate that made Hale Manor look like a quaint cottage. The guest list was exclusive, limited to close family on his side. At least mine was conspicuously absent, save for a few distant, bewildered relatives and key business associates. The media, however, was not excluded. I made sure of that. I wanted the world to see, to witness my triumph, my transformation. I wanted Ethan and Margot to see it, to feel the sting of their defeat. I wore a custom-designed gown, a sleek modern creation that was the antithesis of the frilly, princess-like dress I'd chosen for my previous doomed engagement. It was elegant, powerful, and unapologetically me. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant cousin I'd barely spoken to in years, I saw their faces in the crowd. Ethan, pale and furious, his jaw clenched tight. Margot, her expression a mask of barely concealed rage. Their shock, their disbelief, their humiliation, it was delicious. Goodbye, doomed future, I thought, a fierce sense of satisfaction surging through me. Hello, terrifyingly powerful husband. Alexander, waiting for me at the altar, looked different. Still imposing, still intimidating, but softer somehow. His eyes, usually so cold, held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it admiration, respect, or simply the satisfaction of a deal well made? We exchanged vows, the words echoing in the silent chapel. For richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. It was a charade, of course, a performance. But as Alexander slipped the simple, elegant platinum band onto my finger, I felt a pang of something, regret, longing, or simply the bittersweet ache of leaving behind the life I'd once envisioned, the life that had been so cruelly snatched away from me. It was done. I was now Vivian Whitmore, wife of Alexander Whitmore, partner in a dangerous game, and perhaps something more. Something I hadn't anticipated, something that both terrified and intrigued me. The game had begun. Married life with Alexander Whitmore was an experience. To say it was awkward would be a gross understatement. It was like living in a beautifully appointed, incredibly expensive. The museum was perfect, pristine, and utterly devoid of warmth. We occupied separate wings of Whitmore Manor, our paths rarely crossing except during the occasional strategically scheduled public appearance dinner. We were like two ships passing in the night, except our ships were docked in the same harbor, and that harbor was a sprawling mansion filled with priceless art and an unnerving silence. Our conversations were brief, formal, and strictly business-related. He'd inquire about my progress on the Hale Enterprises investigation, which I'd launched with the intensity of a seasoned detective fueled by revenge and a healthy dose of caffeine. I'd update him on my findings, presenting him with evidence, timelines, and meticulously crafted spreadsheets. His idea of pillow talk was discussing quarterly earnings, I thought, after one particularly thrilling evening spent analyzing financial statements. This is going to be a long marriage. My days were consumed by the investigation. I spent hours poring over old documents, interviewing former employees, and piecing together the puzzle of my father's death and the systematic dismantling of my inheritance. It was a grim, depressing task, forcing me to relive the pain and betrayal of my past life, but it was also empowering. Each piece of evidence I uncovered, each lie I exposed, fueled my determination to bring Margot and Ethan to justice. I knew I was walking a tightrope. I was using my future knowledge to manipulate the present, a dangerous game with potentially disastrous consequences. But I was careful, meticulous, and driven by a fierce desire for retribution. This time I wouldn't be the victim. This time I'd be the victor. And Alexander Whitmore, whether he knew it or not, was my unwitting accomplice, or perhaps my not-so-unwitting accomplice. He was, after all, a master strategist himself. He might be playing a longer game than I realized. The thought was both unsettling and intriguing. My foray into the business world was a baptism by fire. I'd always been interested in fashion and design, but the cutthroat world of corporate finance was a whole different beast. Thankfully, my past life experience, however painful, had given me an invaluable edge. I knew the market trends, the upcoming deals, and the hidden weaknesses of my competitors. I started small, making strategic investments, advising Alexander on key acquisitions, and slowly but surely asserting my presence on the board of Whitmore Industries. The other board members, initially skeptical and condescending, were quickly won over by my sharp insights and surprisingly ruthless negotiating skills. Who knew being betrayed in a past life could be so lucrative? I thought, after successfully outmaneuvering Ethan on a major real estate deal. The look on his face, a mixture of shock and fury, was priceless. Margot, of course, was even less pleased. She tried to undermine me at every turn, spreading rumors, questioning my credentials, and even attempting to sabotage one of my projects, but I was always one step ahead, anticipating her moves and countering them with a swiftness and precision that surprised even me. My relationship with Alexander's staff was evolving. They were initially wary of me, understandably so. I was the new wife, the outsider, the unknown quantity. But as they saw my dedication, my competence, and my genuine respect for their work, they began to thaw. I learned their names, their stories, their strengths and weaknesses. I treated them as equals, not as subordinates, and slowly they began to accept me, even like me. There were, of course, a few mishaps along the way. A disastrous wardrobe malfunction during a high-profile charity gala, A zipper that decided to betray me at the worst possible moment. A near-catastrophic spill of coffee on a multi-million-dollar contract. And a rather unfortunate incident involving a runaway drone and a very expensive sculpture. But hey, nobody's perfect. Especially not a time-traveling, revenge-seeking individual navigating the treacherous waters of high society and corporate warfare. Through it all, Alexander remained observant. He watched me, assessed me, and occasionally offered a cryptic piece of advice or a subtle nod of approval. His respect, I realized, was hard-won but all the more valuable for it. The breakthrough, the first real crack in Alexander's icy facade, came during a late-night work session. We were in his study, poring over financial reports, the silence broken only by the tapping of keys and the occasional sigh of frustration. I'd been working for hours, fueled by caffeine and sheer determination, and I was starting to feel the strain. My head was pounding, my eyes were burning, and I was pretty sure I had developed a permanent squint. Without thinking, I reached up and rubbed my temples, letting out a groan of frustration. "Headache?" Alexander asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I looked up, startled. He was looking at me not with his usual detached expression, but with something that almost resembled concern. "Yeah," I admitted, "a killer one." He nodded, then to my utter astonishment, he stood up, walked over to a small cabinet, and returned with a bottle of pain relievers and a glass of water. "Take these," he said, handing them to me, "and take a break. You've been working non-stop." It was a small gesture, a simple act of kindness, but it was so unexpected, so out of character for the cold, emotionless man I thought I knew, that it took my breath away. I took the pills, swallowing them down with a grateful sip of water. As I looked up at him, I saw something flicker in his eyes. A hint of warmth, a trace of vulnerability. And then he did something even more unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not a full-blown, teeth-baring grin. It was a small, subtle smile, a slight upturn of his lips. But it transformed his face, softening his features, making him look younger, almost approachable. Wait, is he smiling? I thought, my heart doing a strange little skip. Did the world just tilt on its axis? We shared a moment of unexpected connection, a brief respite from the tension, the strategy, and the constant game playing. It was just a moment, a fleeting glimpse behind the mask, but it was enough. I realized with a jolt that I was starting to see him as more than just a strategic partner, more than just a means to an end. I was starting to see him as a man, a complex, flawed, surprisingly human man, and that I knew was a very dangerous development indeed. Predictably, Margot and Ethan weren't thrilled with my sudden rise to power. They'd underestimated me, dismissed me as a naive, easily manipulated pawn. Now I was a threat, a force to be reckoned with, and they were not happy about it. Their counterattack started subtly. Whispers in social circles, carefully worded articles in gossip magazines, veiled accusations of impropriety. They tried to paint me as a gold digger, a social climber, a woman who'd used her feminine wiles to ensnare a powerful man. "Darling," Margot purred during a particularly tense encounter at a charity luncheon, "are you sure you're up to this? The business world can be so demanding." Her smile was all sugar and venom. "I managed just fine, Margot," I replied, my voice equally sweet, equally poisonous. "In fact, I'm thriving." Ethan, ever the charmer, tried a different approach. He attempted to appeal to my better nature, to convince me that we should let bygones be bygones, that we could all move on from the past. "Vivian," he said, his voice sincere and earnest, a performance worthy of an Oscar really, "I know we've had our differences, but surely we can put all this behind us for the sake of old times." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the desperation lurking beneath the surface. He was losing, and he knew it. "Old times," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the times when you stole my inheritance, ruined my reputation, and left me for dead? Those old times." His smile faltered. "Vivian, that's not fair." "Fair?" I scoffed. "Fair is for fairy tales, Ethan. This is real life, and in real life actions have consequences." I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They were desperate, cornered, and therefore dangerous. But I was ready for them. I had an advantage they didn't. I knew their secrets, I knew their weaknesses, I knew their past. "I can play at this game, Margot," I thought, a grim determination hardening my resolve. "And this time I have the cheat codes." I began to subtly leak information, carefully chosen tidbits of their past misdeeds to the right people. I exposed their shady business deals, their offshore accounts, their less than savory personal lives. I did it anonymously, of course, using my network of contacts and my newfound knowledge of the digital underworld. Thank you, Alexander, for introducing me to your surprisingly helpful team of cybersecurity experts. It was a slow, calculated campaign designed to dismantle their reputations, to erode their power base, to make them pay for what they'd done. And it was working. The deeper I delved into the Hale family finances, the more disturbing being the picture. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was a systematic, calculated dismantling of my father's empire. And the trail led directly to Margot and Ethan. But there was one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit: my father's death. It had been ruled an accident, a tragic fall down the stairs at Hale Manor, but something about it had always felt wrong. I spent weeks poring over old police reports, medical records, and witness statements. I hired a private investigator, a discreet, highly recommended professional who specialized in unsolved mysteries. Then we found it: a hidden clause in my father's life insurance policy, a clause that benefited Margot directly in the event of his accidental death. This clause had been added just weeks before he died. The investigator also uncovered a witness, a former housekeeper at Hale Manor who'd been mysteriously let go shortly after my father's death. She'd seen Margot arguing with my father on the night he died, heard a loud crash and then silence. The truth hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't an accident, it was murder. Margot and Ethan had murdered my father. They took everything from me. I thought, my hands trembling with rage and grief. My family, my fortune, my life. They're going to pay. The pain of my father's death, which I tried to bury to numb, resurfaced with a vengeance. It was a raw, agonizing wound reopened and exposed. But amidst the grief, there was a new fierce determination. I wouldn't just avenge my past life. I would avenge my father. I would bring his killers to justice. This was no longer just about business, about power, about revenge. This was personal. As I navigated the treacherous waters of corporate espionage and family betrayal, I found myself increasingly drawn to Alexander. He was still an enigma, a puzzle I was desperately trying to solve. But the glimpses of vulnerability I'd seen, the fleeting moments of connection, had sparked something within me. Something I was trying very hard to ignore. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and confrontations, I found him in his study, not working but staring out the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked lost. "Alexander," I said hesitantly. He turned, startled, as if he'd forgotten I existed. "Ed." He quickly masked his expression, reverting to his usual impassive demeanor. "Is everything all right?" I asked, taking a tentative step closer. He hesitated, then sighed. "It's the anniversary," he said, his voice low. "Anniversary," I prompted gently. He took a long swallow of his scotch, his gaze fixed on the city lights below. "My brother," he said finally. "He died 5 years ago." He told me the story, his voice devoid of emotion yet somehow conveying the depth of his pain. His younger brother, his only family, had been killed in a car accident. A drunk driver, a senseless tragedy. But there was more to the story. The driver, a wealthy, influential man, had used his connections to evade justice. He'd walked away with a slap on the wrist, leaving Alexander consumed by grief. With a burning desire for revenge, he dedicated his life to building his empire, amassing power, and ensuring that no one would ever be able to hurt him or those he cared about again. He'd built walls around his heart, impenetrable barriers designed to protect him from the pain of loss. So the Ice King has a heart after all, I thought, a wave of empathy washing over me. A deeply buried, heavily guarded heart, but a heart nonetheless. I understood him in a way I hadn't before. We were both driven by loss, by betrayal, by a desire to right the wrongs of the past. We were both survivors, scarred but not broken. "I'm sorry, Alexander," I said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched as if surprised by my touch, but he didn't pull away. He looked at me, his blue eyes filled with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. In that moment, the walls between us seemed to crumble just a little. The strategic alliance, the marriage of convenience, the carefully constructed facade, It all faded away, leaving only two wounded souls finding solace in each other's presence. It happened gradually, then all at once, like a slow-building crescendo or a rogue wave crashing over me before I even saw it coming. I, Vivian Hale Whitmore, avenger of past lives and destroyer of enemies, was falling in love with my fake husband. It wasn't logical. It wasn't convenient. It was, in fact, a complete and utter disaster. We had a contract, a legally binding agreement that specifically forbade emotional entanglement. This was a business arrangement, a strategic alliance, a temporary partnership designed to achieve a specific goal: revenge. And now here I was, developing feelings for the man I was supposed to be using as a pawn in my elaborate game of corporate chess. This was not part of the plan, I thought, staring at Alexander across the breakfast table one morning. He was reading the financial news, his brow furrowed in concentration, his jawline impossibly sharp. I'm supposed to be avenging my past life, not developing feelings for my contract husband. This is a disaster. It was the little things that got to me. The way he remembered how I liked my coffee black, 2 sugars, a detail I'd never even told him. He'd just noticed. The way he'd subtly adjust the thermostat in the car to my preferred temperature. The way he'd look at me sometimes, a flicker of something warm and almost tender in his usually icy blue eyes. It was the big things too. His unwavering support, his fierce protectiveness, his grudging but undeniable respect for my intelligence and my ambition. He challenged me, pushed me, and to my surprise, inspired me. He was everything Ethan wasn't. Strong, honest, principled in his own ruthless way. And then there was the undeniable physical attraction. The man was, objectively speaking, ridiculously handsome, and the way he filled out a suit, well, let's just say it was a constant distraction. But it was more than that. It was the connection we were building, the unspoken understanding, the shared sense of purpose. It was the way he made me feel safe, strong, and alive. I tried to deny it, to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just gratitude or admiration or some bizarre form of Stockholm Syndrome. But the truth was undeniable. I was falling for Alexander Whitmore, and that I knew was going to complicate things considerably. If I was struggling with my unexpected feelings for Alexander, he was completely bewildered by his own. He had built his life on logic, on control, on emotional detachment. Love, affection, vulnerability. These were foreign concepts, weaknesses to be avoided at all costs. And yet, he couldn't deny the growing attachment he felt towards me. He found himself seeking out my company, craving my conversation, and yes, even enjoying my snarky humor. He also found himself experiencing a rather unfamiliar and thoroughly unpleasant emotion: jealousy. It started subtly, a tightening of his jaw when I mentioned a male colleague's name, a curt dismissal of a compliment paid to me by another man, a possessive hand on my waist during social events, a silent warning to any potential rivals. He couldn't explain it, couldn't understand it. It was illogical, irrational, and completely out of character. He was Alexander Whitmore. He didn't do jealousy. Inner monologue, Alexander's POV. She's different. She's not what I expected. She's intelligent, resourceful, and surprisingly resilient. She challenges me, pushes me, and she makes me laugh. And I don't want to lose her. He found himself watching me, observing my interactions with others, analyzing my every expression, my every gesture. He saw the way men looked at me, the admiration, the desire, and it sparked something primal, something possessive, something he hadn't felt in, well, ever. He hated it. He hated the feeling of vulnerability, the loss of control, the need he was starting to feel for this woman who barged into his carefully ordered life and turned it upside down. But he couldn't deny it. He was jealous, and that jealousy was a clear indication that his feelings for Vivian were far more complex, far more profound than he'd ever anticipated. He was in deep, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Margot and Ethan, predictably, didn't take their defeat lying down. They were cornered, desperate, and fueled by a potent mixture of rage and revenge. They launched their final, most ambitious scheme. A complex plot designed to destroy both me and Alexander, to bring us down in a blaze of public disgrace. They'd been watching us, studying us, learning from their past mistakes. They knew about my past life memories, my use of future knowledge, my growing closeness to Alexander, and they used it all against us. They fabricated evidence, manipulated records, and planted false information, creating a narrative that painted me as a fraud, a con artist, and a corporate spy. They accused me of using my marriage to Alexander to gain access to confidential information, to sabotage his company, and to enrich myself at his expense. They even managed to implicate Kate. Alexander suggested he was either a willing accomplice or a hopelessly naive dupe. It was a brilliant, ruthless plan designed to exploit our vulnerabilities and destroy our credibility. The attack came swiftly and brutally. News reports, social media posts, leaked documents. The accusations spread like wildfire, fueling a public outcry and threatening to topple everything we'd built. I was devastated, not just by the accusations themselves but by the realization that Margot and Ethan had learned from their past mistakes. They'd anticipated my moves, countered my strategies, and used my own strengths against me. They've learned from the past, I thought, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Damn it, this is worse than I thought. Alexander initially was furious. He saw the attack as a personal betrayal, a violation of his trust. He was tempted to lash out, to retaliate with all the force of his considerable power. But then he saw me. He saw the fear in my eyes, the vulnerability I was trying so hard to conceal. He realized that this wasn't just about him, about his company, about his reputation. It was about us. He knew he had a choice to make. He could revert to his old ways, to the cold, calculating logic that had always guided him, or he could trust me. He could believe in me. He could fight for me. And for the first time in his life, he chose love over logic. He chose us. Knowing Margot and Ethan's plan, thanks to my past life memories and a healthy dose of paranoia, gave me a crucial advantage. I knew their target, their methods, and most importantly, their timing. While Alexander rallied his legal and security teams, I worked behind the scenes, gathering evidence and preparing my counterattack. I used my knowledge of their past crimes, their secret accounts, their hidden connections. I was like a chess master, anticipating their every move, setting traps, and preparing for the final showdown. The public reveal was orchestrated with precision. Margot and Ethan had planned a press conference intending to expose my fraudulent past and my manipulation of Alexander. They thought they had the upper hand, that they were about to deliver the final crushing blow. They were wrong. As they stood before the cameras, smug and self-satisfied, ready to unleash their fabricated accusations, I stepped onto the stage. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and Margot and Ethan stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Hello, Margot, Ethan," I said, my voice calm and steady, amplified by the microphone. Surprised to see me, I then proceeded to dismantle their carefully constructed lies piece by piece. I presented irrefutable evidence of their past crimes. The embezzlement, the manipulation, the conspiracy to frame me, and most damningly, their involvement in my father's death. I revealed their current plot, exposing their fabricated evidence, their paid witnesses, their desperate attempt to destroy me and Alexander. I showed the world in excruciating detail, bound us together not as business partners, not as allies but as lovers, as two souls finally reunited, finally free to embrace the love that had been denied to them for so long. With Margot and Ethan out of the picture, I was finally able to take my rightful place as the head of the Hale family business. But I didn't want to simply reclaim what was mine. I wanted to transform it. I wanted to build something better, something that honored my father's true legacy. I sold off the corrupt divisions, restructured the company, and focused on ethical, sustainable practices. I invested in new technologies, supported emerging artists, and created a foundation dedicated to empowering women in business. I used my power, my wealth, my influence to make a positive impact on the world. I wanted to create a legacy that was built on integrity, compassion, and a genuine desire to do good. It wasn't easy. There were challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but I persevered, driven by a newfound sense of purpose, a desire to create something meaningful, something that would last. And I wasn't alone. Alexander was by my side every step of the way. He offered his support, his expertise, his unwavering belief in me. He was my partner, my confidant, my love. Together we were unstoppable. Vivian and Alexander, having solidified their personal and professional partnership, decided to not only restore the Hale family legacy, but also to expand their influence by building a joint empire. They merged their strengths. Vivian's intuitive understanding of market trends and ethical business practices, and Alexander's strategic acumen and vast resources. They launched several new ventures focusing on sustainable technologies and innovative solutions to global challenges. Their projects ranged from developing eco-friendly urban housing to funding cutting-edge medical research. They became known not just for their wealth, but for their commitment to making a tangible positive difference in the world. Vivian spearheaded initiatives that supported women entrepreneurs, providing mentorship and funding to help them launch their own businesses. Alexander, inspired by Vivian's compassion and driven by his own desire to atone for his past emotional detachment, established programs to support mental health awareness and treatment, particularly for young people struggling with the pressures of modern life. Their combined efforts not only expanded their fortunes but also created a ripple effect of positive change, earning them accolades and respect far beyond the confines of the business world. They became a power couple in the truest sense, using their influence to build a better future. Together, they often joked that their contract marriage had turned into the most successful merger in history, both personally and professionally.